Hello and welcome to the Artellectuals podcast. Hope everyone is having a wonderful start of the week. For today's episode, we have a great guest, Ljova. He is a composer, violist, and violinist, or as he prefers to be called, more of a fadalinist, something like a fiddle player. I came across Ljova through the freelance community in New York, and we started chatting when I was looking for a klezmer piece for string quartet. We incorporated the piece into our program, and it was a great hit. Ljova's works have been commissioned by Yo-Yo Ma and the Silk Road Ensemble, Brooklyn Rider Quartet, and many others. He also has arranged pieces for the LA Philharmonic, San Francisco Symphony, Detroit Symphony, conductors Gustavo Dudamel, and many others. He has composed over 70 original compositions encompassing classical, jazz, and folk music genres. You can find more information about Ljova on his website, ljova.com. You can view and listen to his works there, and he is also available on Instagram, spelled out as LJOVADOTCOM. Before we continue with the show, please consider taking a moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons if you're on YouTube, or leave a rating and review if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts. That would be a great help for us. Thank you so much. Now, I am honored to present today's podcast with Ljova Zhurbin. Well, thank you, Ljova, for coming online and giving your time today to talk about your history, performing and composing and being a part of the New York City community.
My pleasure.
Great.
Great pleasure.
Well, I'd like to get started a little bit knowing more about you, some background, like where you were born, who you're influenced by, things like that.
Sure. That's pretty open-ended. Well, I was born in Moscow, Russia in 1978. And my father is a wonderful Russian composer, Alexander Zhurbin. His first instrument was the cello. Then he was classically trained as a composer. First as a cellist and then as a composer at the St. Petersburg Conservatory. He studied with Shostakovich, with Khachaturian, with Nikolai Peiko, who was a big Russian pedagogue. And my father was classically trained, but in 1975, he wrote Russia's first rock opera based on the Orpheus myth. In this case, Orpheus was a rock singer who sings in a competition, and so on and so forth. And that was a runaway sensation for the Soviet Union. It was a show that played for years. I think it's still in the Guinness Book of Records for Russia as the longest running show in Russia. And in its day, it ran in theaters all over the country, also in stadiums. Sometimes my dad tells me that sometimes it played in stadiums several times a day.
Wow.
Rock and roll was very new in Russia and kind of halfway forbidden. And it wasn't called a rock opera at the time. It was called a zong opera, not even a song opera, but a zong opera. And,
How long was it?
How long was it? Well, it's a full 2-act show. Beautiful show. I finally got to see it last year, around last April. I went to Moscow I finally saw it. So I grew up in this. My dad's a composer, and my mom is a writer. My mom, Irena Ginsburg, is a writer and a translator. And together, my parents have written shows together and songs together. So my father, as a composer, he always had this like polystylistic approach and a very open approach to genre, and very open approach to collaboration. He's written symphonies. He's written a cello concerto, a viola concerto, violin concerto. He's written, several operas and over 24 musicals, if not 36 musicals at this point. And he's spent probably the last 55 years working as a composer in Russia and also as a journalist, He's written several books and had a radio show and even a TV show at one point. And just being involved in every part of the arts in Russia. So I grew up in this family with my mother, a writer, and a poet, and my dad, a composer. And together, my parents had performed a lot, actually. My mom has a wonderful voice, and they would sing together, and they still do. They sing together and perform all over the world. So I grew up in this kind of family. I started off on the violin when I was 4, I think, and had a good old Soviet Russian education until we moved to New York when I was 11. And I really wanted to quit the violin, and so I quit. And we just got to the States, and we didn't have a whole lot of stuff, and which is to say we had nothing, pretty much nothing. And so I quit the violin, and my dad, instead of selling the violin, he thought that it would be smarter, since I already had this was in January or so, and I was studying at that point at the Manhattan School of Music Preparatory Division. And I had a scholarship that was through May, so he thought instead of quitting, maybe I should switch my violin to viola. He would trade in my violin for a viola, and I could at least finish off the year at MSM, since somebody gave us the scholarship, and it was very nice of them, and I could finish off. Well, that half a year was very pivotal in that I started to get a taste of a less competitive nature of the violin world, and of a more kind of collaborative and a more inclusive feeling in the viola section and the orchestra. I played my first chamber music around that time, and chamber music was very much, well, what do you think? What do you think? And it felt you felt kind of that somebody actually cared what you think, and it felt somewhat more necessary, rather than violins. You were one of the 30 or 40 of them. Here you were one of the dozen or 10 or whatever it was. And it was a huge kind of emotional boost, and I didn't have to compete so hard, and I could focus more on music. And so that's what I did. I switched to viola when I was about 12, and played viola through college. I ended up going to Juilliard for my bachelor's. I ended up going to all sorts of summer festivals in Germany and in Italy, and in the States, playing viola, also composing and arranging. And I was also, while I was in college, it was kind of like the beginnings of the I want to say the consumer internet or something like that. Does that make sense? It wasn't around. We got our first computer with my bar mitzvah money when I was 13, and it felt kind of like the beginning of the personal kind of computer, like the real connected personal computer era. Like this was one of the first times with computers with a modem and so forth, and the internet was really taking off. America Online, Prodigy, and so forth, and the other thing that was taking off was the kind of the indie music scene was really on the internet, was really blooming, because the major labels were not that interested in the internet at first, anyway. The major I don't know, classical or whichever, everyone thought, oh, the internet, yeah, it's good for email, and maybe that's about it, really, but it's slow, and you can't really do music, you can't listen to anything at full resolution. So but for independent musicians who couldn't print CDs and who couldn't go into studios, the internet, okay, it was slow, but it was a way of getting things done, and it was a way of getting your music out there. And so there was this website called mp3.com. This is now like the mid-90s. Like 97, 98. Right. I was at Juilliard at that point. In were you around then? How old are you? I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm 27.
You're 27, so.
And I also did,
Okay.
and I also went to MSN pre-college actually. So we
Did
share a little
you?
bit of there.
Did you catch
that was
Mr.
actually
Strasser
before-
there at all?
Mr. Strasser, I know from ISO because my sister went to interschool orchestras. I didn't. I was in the orchestra before then, and then I moved on to just pre-college without the ISO. But yeah, that's and then I went to Brooklyn.
There
College,
was a
pre-college,
time-
then.
Interesting. Yeah, you grew up in Brooklyn. There was a time. So I grew up on the Upper West Side. And there was a time in my life where I played in Mr. Strasser's orchestras for 6, sometimes 7 days a week, because I went to LaGuardia High
Wow.
School, and so I would see him there 5 days a week, and then I would play in ISO on Wednesdays, and then I would play at Manhattan School of Music, the preparatory division orchestras on Saturdays. Sometimes ISO had concerts on Sundays, so I would see him 6 to 7 days a week and play in all of his different groups, and it was a huge, it was a wonderful experience, really, really wonderful. It really made me fall in love with the orchestra and with the camaraderie of an orchestra and being on stage with all these wonderful people. And
That's great. Were you there
you know-
before they went to Spain, the Toledos tour?
I did not go. Pre-college went on tour to Spain.
No, it was ISO, I think.
ISO. We didn't. I in the years that I was there, we didn't go on tour anywhere.
Okay.
I mean, we may have gone to like New Jersey or something. But
I'm just curious if we had a coinciding timeline. That would be kind of interesting.
I stopped playing in ISO when must be like the year 96, 95, something like that.
Okay, that would have been too early. Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyways,
Might have been 97.
you got there in 97.
I think it would be around 97. Yeah, that I entered.
I was in college from 96 onwards, so so I must have missed you by about a year. But nonetheless, so mp3.com was another wonderful experience. mp3.com was kind of like what we have on SoundCloud now, but now everything is faster. There's a lot more people there, but in those days it was kind of like the Wild West. mp3.com had a lot of venture capital money. There was actually some money to be made, if you can believe it, in streaming audio. In those days, mp3.com would pay you 10 cents per stream. 10 cents, not 10 fraction of a cents, but 10 actual cents for a stream of your music on their website, because they had all this money. And then eventually, in about a year, they ran out of that money, and they started paying a penny per stream. But still, a penny per stream in the early 90s, or in the mid 90s for like a website. And then they could also make short order CDs. The people would order CDs of your music, and all you had to do is just upload the cover art and so forth. And I forget, it was like $9 or $10 or something. Anyways, but the other thing that mp3.com did, aside from make us all these cents, and I don't know, I think I probably made like $1,000 off of mp3 back in the day. But the other thing is that it really built a community of musicians all over the world. And it gave me experience. People would reach out to me out of the blue, and they would say, "Hi, I loved your recordings," and I would upload recordings of my recitals or like demos of pieces I was making on the synthesizer. "I loved your recordings. I'm a singer-songwriter, and I'm working on a piece, and it could use some strings. Do you mind? Would you be interested in recording some sort of viola line? I don't have a budget. I can or can't read music. I'm not going to write you a chart, but do you mind taking a stab at it?" And I, like, oh, okay, sure, why not? This sounds fun. So I made, a whole bunch of friends this way, all over the world, some people that I've kept in touch with. It was a real wonderful community. And it opened my eyes to a lot of different music and people and the internet. And so in some sense, like, I feel right now, this whole thing with where we are musically, I feel very much like back in those days, because all of my musical life now is online.
I think it's
it's
frozen.
so I'm in front of the microphone, making stuff. Sometimes with musicians, sometimes with myself, sometimes with my wife. It feels just like back in those days in some sense. And we're putting it up online and we're sharing it like this is the product. We're not inviting anybody to the show, so it feels kind of similar. So another thing that happened in those days is that I played in a wedding ensemble with a group of Russian emigres who were 10, 20, and 30 years older than me. And they were really wonderful. They were called the Imperial strings.
Oh, yes.
They pronounce it Imperial strings, but
I'm familiar with them, actually. I know.
Do you know
I've been to a
Roman?
wedding with. I don't know. I'm friends with him on Facebook, but I've been to a wedding where they performed, and it's an interesting group of people.
It is.
Sure. I like
Did they
it.
do
It's
the
a good
whole
show.
Gypsy show?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes. That's a good.
Yeah.
It's a good show. I like it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, so I started off with them right around. I was at Juilliard, and I was playing in the orchestras at Juilliard, and also I was playing in like community orchestra in the Bronx and so forth. And then somebody reached out and said, "There's a wedding tomorrow. We're looking for a violist. Are you available? And it pays such and such." And I'm like, wow, it pays well, but I've never played a wedding, and it's tomorrow, and I guess I'm free. I don't really want to do it, but okay. But since nobody is available and it's tomorrow, I guess I better go cover. So I went and I played it, and it was wonderful, and it was short, and it paid well, and we ate great. And it was my first wedding gig ever. And then a few weeks later, they called me again, and they said, "Hey, it's another situation. You can't make it. Do you mind covering?" I said, "Okay." And then after a couple of these, kind of me slightly being reluctant, it's like, I'm at Juilliard, it's my freshman year, I'm playing, I don't know, the whatever concerto, and I'm studying with this wonderful teacher, and playing chamber music, and the orchestra, and they're like, here, someone called me to play the wedding gig. And so after a few of these, they sat me down and said, well, it's not too late. It pays well, it doesn't take that much time, there's good food. And
Drinks too.
So, I was a kid at that point. So I ended up playing with this wedding group on and off for about 10 years. And it's really a wonderful place where I learned to improvise, because it started off very innocently. It started off like they had some handwritten sheet music that they must have copied out at some point. And I would play it, and I would find wrong notes. And, this is probably this note. It's probably this note. And then after, a few weeks of playing it, I was like, okay, well, what else can we do? Maybe this note can also be this. Oh, look, I just discovered a whole different kind of counterpoint I can do with the same line. And then I started just fooling around and making all sorts of different viola parts for this group when I would play. And then eventually I just felt, at the same time they started doing things with it. The group started expanding from a string quartet to like a jazz band and so forth. So I started playing with them. They, ever so often, they would ask me to arrange stuff because brides and grooms had interesting requests, and I would have to take a piece from a CD. Back in the day, you actually had to go buy the CD. You couldn't just look it up on YouTube. Meet somewhere on the corner to buy the CD, get reimbursed for the CD, and so forth. And
wow, what a process!
I know. It was back.
We take
in the
that
day.
for
People
granted
would
now, right?
People would FedEx you stuff. Anyways, so I would grab a CD and try to write down pretty much the song. And try to make it in a version for string quartet, or a version for string trio, or a version for string quartet plus flute and harp, or trumpet, or whatever it is that we were working with. And I would just try to write it out as close as possible, or to make an arrangement of it that would make sense. And that was a great arranging school. So basically, in parallel to my Juilliard education, where I was playing, core viola repertoire in the contemporary music ensemble with Joel Sachs and in the orchestra. In parallel to all of that, and in parallel to collaborating with people on the internet, I learned how to improvise and how to arrange. And then also in parallel, there was someone suggested that I try to look into writing film music, and I met some filmmakers online. I met some filmmakers by posting flyers at NYU and at Columbia, And I was also collaborating with filmmakers and learning what that's all about and how it is working with picture, how it is synchronizing things, how to work on no budget, and all sorts of things like that. And all of that kind of worked together. That eventually I got a call from my cousin Johnny Gandelsman of Brooklyn Rider, who asked if I would be interested in arranging some Romanian gypsy tunes for the Silk Road Ensemble, with whom he was playing on and off. They were looking to do a tour for a string quartet with youre on cello and Wu Man as the pipa player. So it would be and they asked me to do this, and because they knew that I arranged a lot of music for string quartet for the wedding quartet, and they thought it would be an interesting fit. And in parallel, I've been writing all sorts of different music, and I was kind of into tons of things. And so, of course, I agreed, and I made these arrangements, and they loved them. And in parallel to that, they were rehearsing those arrangements at Tanglewood that summer. This is now probably 2004 or something like that. And Osvaldo Golihov was there, and while they were rehearsing those arrangements at Tanglewood, I presumed for a premiere of his. And he heard those arrangements and he liked them. He reached out to me about helping him with some arrangements he was working on for the Kronos Quartet. And then eventually we met up, and he also asked me to play on the premiere of his work, Youre, which was a song cycle for Dawn Upshaw, and kind of a companion piece to the Barrio folk songs. Mm-hmm. And we began a wonderful friendship that continues to this day. And I started arranging a whole bunch of pieces for Kronos, at the same time doing more pieces and some more work for Silk Road. At the same time, I released my first album. We started a band to promote the first album. So it was a lot of stuff that happened. So that's probably the whole
adventure, right?
You probably have more questions.
I do have a few questions. I didn't want to interject because you're already saying such interesting things about your story, how it all went through. So during the Juilliard years, you were studying primarily viola. You were not studying composition there at that time.
No, I was at Juilliard. I only did a bachelor's. I don't have a master's. There's a couple of funny stories with that. The reason my father, who, as I said, he's a composer, who was a cellist, he was adamant that I do a bachelor's in an instrument because he thought I should know a practical trade and I should know how to play an instrument and have a degree in case the composition thing doesn't work out or whatnot. I guess he probably had a bachelor's in cello, and so he thought it was important that I do that. And then he thought, well, if you finish the bachelor's and you really want to you really want to go and do a master's in composition, then you could do it. And so actually when I was at Juilliard in my junior year, I reached out to someone in the composition faculty, whom I won't name, but a wonderful person. And I said, I'd want to study composition with you. And that person wrote me a sweet email. And I wish I could find the original, but I always paraphrase it. I've been trying to find in the text of all of my emails, but because I've remembered it. Basically, it said, thank you. You seem to be doing well in the real world. I know lots of people with PhDs in composition who are driving cabs. Masters in composition is for people who need a safe place to write for a few years. You don't seem to have that problem. Stay in the real world. It's the only place where you could make a difference. And so I got that advice, and it kind of slowed me down, and I didn't apply for that master's that year, and I didn't submit anything, and I just kind of stayed in the real world. And I've now been graduated for 24, almost 25 years.
And it worked out quite well for you.
And it worked
with
out.
The Naxos recordings and everything. I mean,
things have been recorded. It's funny with all this recording stuff. You think, I played a recording session with Dawn Upshaw for Deutsche Grammophon. I've made it. Yo-Yo Ma has recorded something on Sony Classical. now I've really made it, you know. And there's all these kind of milestones, and I don't know if you really ever make it, because, you know, nothing. They make, there's no real destination. It's all, you know, a journey of discovering what the next step is, and it's not logical, like, you know, oh, you played on a major label.
But there are like big breaks,
so
you would say, though, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. There are things that have been big, but it's I don't know if that's not really the how you measure success for me.
Of course.
For how, you know, but
the sky's the limit, for sure.
Well, just, I don't know if the sky's the limit. You know, the limit is how long can you keep it interesting for yourself and for the audience, and how long can you keep discovering new things, and how long does it, you know, there's so many things that you want to do because there's new technological things that you want to explore. There are new people you want to play with, and at the same time, there are new people that I want to play with. There are old people that I miss right now dearly, like my band, and then there are just things you have to figure out with yourself, like what is so interesting about what I do, and what is the next step, and how is this useful to anybody? How is this healing to anybody? How is this useful to any other composer? You know, that kind of thing.
Wow.
So that's the real journey, not really a destination, but just like, as long as you could keep going, that's,
yeah,
you know.
Great. Well, I did have some more questions about.
Sure.
So when you were in this, during the Juilliard years, you were in this gigging group, and you were doing a lot of things by ear. Is that where you really formed your nick for composing at that moment? Because you mentioned how you were starting to arrange pieces and things like that. Is that what cultivated that idea that, okay, now I really do want to get more into composing because I'm actually good at it?
I mean, I don't know if any composer will ever say, I think I'm good at it. I mean, there are some people who are really professional, and maybe having a degree in composition does help with that confidence. I always feel that I get super lucky if anything comes out and it communicates. You know, it's always a challenge to start fresh, and always a challenge to find something special to say.
Where does your inspiration come from, you'd say, for that, in that regard?
I mean, part of it, you'll laugh. But I mean, part of, you know, like 50% of inspiration comes from looking out the window, and 50% of the inspiration comes from looking at your notepad, you know, from looking at what you're working with, looking at your piece of paper. 50% of the work actually comes from working. If you keep looking out the window, you're never going to write anything. But if you look out the window and make sure to look back at your notepad or your instrument or whatever, you know, I'm very informal about notation practices sometimes. I use it all, right? I write by hand a lot, and that feels very grounded and very free. I sometimes will take out my phone and sing into it, especially when I'm without paper, which is rare, but ever so often. I will sing into it, and I will take a video, which often it's just like my feet. But it doesn't kind of, you know, whatever is more immediate, I'll sing into my phone. In the old days, I used to call my answering machine. I will play something. In fact, Budget Bulgar, which I think you guys played, right?
Yes, thank you. That's how we really got to know each other, actually.
Right. So Budget Bulgar, that was written at a wedding gig, and there's actually a recording of the original sketch of Budget Bulgar, which is basically me at a catering hall somewhere in Middle New Jersey, putting my flip phone on the trunk of some car in the parking lot and playing this. It was basically like I was tuning for a while, and then I started playing what became Budget Bulgar. So that's up there somewhere. So I'm very flexible with how ideas come, and I try to work through them. Sometimes, even if some like those things like Budget Bulgar, I would send a voicemail, then I would write it out on paper, and I would change, and then I would try to play the thing on paper, and then I would change it again. So it's very fluid between the instrument, the pencil, the recording device, and the orchestration on the computer and so forth.
And refinement, you just constantly refining it.
I'm sorry?
You were constantly refining it, doing that process.
Yeah, it keeps changing all the time these days too. I did a project. I did a little thing. Sorry, I did a thing just over yesterday that I was thinking about for a couple of days, and I started writing it out, and I thought it would be more immediate if I just play it.
Okay.
So it depends. They're all wonderful tools: the notepads, the voicemails, the videos, the writing things out on the computer and whatnot, manipulating things in a sequencer, right? Or sequencer, that's so old-fashioned. In a digital audio workstation. So
what do you do when you're stuck, though? When you're in the middle of writing something, do you have moments where you're like, okay, I don't know what to do. What next? What's your thought process on that, especially when you have like a deadline?
Well, drink more tea, typically.
Mm-hmm.
I am able to go on for days and days, as long as the tea kettle has some hot water in it, and just drink more tea, and maybe get some crackers eventually, and drink some more tea, or go for a walk. But it's that's kind of like me and my rituals. There's tea, there's water, there's walking, and there's back to work kind of thing. And kids and emails and errands and shopping and laundry and whatever else. So.
Absolutely. Well, what's the best part about composing for you?
But there's so many great things about it. I don't know what really is best. I mean, I feel like, well, first, I guess the best part of composing is that it brings me in touch with musicians, with other musicians from various, who play, other instruments than myself, and they find something of their own and in the music, and it's a kind of a collaboration between what I was thinking and what they're thinking. Mm-hmm. And that's very powerful, because me playing fiddle can only go so far, right? I can play, and that's nice, but if someone else plays, there's already a connection in that, and that's very, very powerful. The other thing, of course, is composing. It creates an opportunity for someone else to shine, and it creates an opportunity for the music to live, after I die, if it interests somebody, and that's also great. And it slows down time. It slows down time that I really have to think about. Like when I improvise, I might play things and they might fall in perfect place, but if I were to write out the same thing, or to approximate, composing is really kind of for figuring things out,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out, do you really mean that? Or would this be an interesting challenge? Or is this something, so you keep asking yourself questions, and you don't really know the answers until you try it. It's an incredible, and you spend a lot of time in silence too. I don't know if anybody really wants to hear me play Bach or play Reger or play the Walton Concerto or play the Bartok Concerto or all these pieces I love, or the Martinu Concerto, or the Janáček string quartets, which I also love. I don't know if anybody really needs me to play those pieces, because there are so many wonderful players. and there's so many people who can play that music and who know, and and I love listening to them play it. So for me, it's like, okay, what can I do that? How can I best contribute? How can I best contribute to the musicians of my generation, whom I know, who I'm in touch with, and so I think composing kind of becomes that, to provide new repertoire, to provide kind of a document of we were here. That's so exciting about this moment too, about composing in this moment, because we're all spread out, and there are things we can do over Zoom, and there are things that we can't. There are different technologies that are more advantageous for certain things, that are less advantageous for certain things. Styles of music that can be played, styles of music that can't be played, and all these other wonderful combinations of musicians who for some reason are stuck together in an apartment or a house, and all these jolly combinations of people. So it's a wonderful kind of new world.
Yeah, in a way, limitations kind of give us new opportunities in some strange way.
Oh, without question.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I did have maybe a couple closing questions about,
Sure.
What you would share with aspiring composers. Some words of wisdom, some things for people who are just starting out. What would be a message you'd like to send them?
I guess I haven't thought about it a whole lot. It's I don't know. I mean, I think it depends. First of all, is just listen to everything. Listen to music from everywhere, and get to know and see what really resonates for you in that music, and see what resonates for the people who are offering you to listen to music. Listen to music from all over the world, from different cultures. Try to kind of figure out on the macro scale what makes it work, and on the micro scale, what are the instruments, what are the samples, what are the production elements that are making this work. Okay, this song is repetitive, but how is it repetitive but also not repetitive? Like, what are the little changes that people are making in the production, in the mix as the song goes on? So, one is, to keep your ears open and low to the ground, and be receptive when people play music for you, and see what there is to hear. And the other is, I guess, to really get to know your musician community, and to grow with a musician community, to get to know musicians and ask them if you could write something, just relentlessly. Do you think I could write something for your next, recital, for your father's birthday, for your grandmother's birthday, for any occasion that you have more than two musicians in a room for some reason? Do you think I could write for that? That's very interesting. Can you, other things, can you tell me about your instrument? That's a great, I remember my fondest, experience when the Yo-Yo Ma and Silk Road asked me to arrange gypsy music for them. I reached out to Wu Man because I had no idea how to write for pipa, and so she said, come over. So I took the bus to Massachusetts, where she was living, and I spent an afternoon, and she played pipa for me, and she told me about her instrument and what sounds good, what are not. I studied some scores of the of pipa concerto written for her, so I was somewhat familiar with the notation. So ask people about their instruments, and ask what you could write for them. Be I think performers in conservatories often feel very separate from the composers in the composition community. In the composition community, that sounds terrible. Performers and composers kind of have very different lives, and they only intersect at like the composer orchestra readings or whatever, and that always ends up being this very formal,
Engagement.
kind of a well, it becomes more about notation than about the music. It becomes, oh yeah, my instrument doesn't have that note. Yeah, but do you want these notes long or short? And it becomes very kind of clerical sometimes in rehearsals.
Right.
Because people are short on time and they have to learn a piece and and so forth, and they're not really getting a sense of it, and so it becomes about notation and, oh, your score wasn't specific enough, or your score was too specific, and I don't know. I think if you were able to create a relationship with musicians early on, and that if composers are kind of a vital part of a musical ecosystem, and we learn from the performers, and we learn what's on their recital program, and we're able to write companion pieces, and really kind of mesh ourselves into the structure of their performing. I could go on because I feel that our education is so regimented between the classical path and the jazz path and that at Juilliard the jazz people are here and the classical people are there, and these people improvise and these people don't. You can either have a jazz trumpet instructor or a classical trumpet instructor, and it's a completely different world and a completely different curriculum. You would think that 20th century music history has a lot in common, but apparently there's a 20th century jazz history and a 20th century classical history who probably don't intersect for some reason, even though it was all at the same time. So,
Right.
So, the more cognizant you can be of people and music and instruments and the global, even the non-music world. I mean, if you could pay attention to the news and the anything, the more sentient
Outside.
you can be, the more attentive you can be to the needs of your community, to the needs of your musical community, and to the needs of your community at large. Because it's not just about the music community; it's about the music lovers community. It's about the people who go to concerts, who support new work, who there's a whole generation of people, probably several generations of patrons who think that contemporary music is alienating and thorny and not necessary or something. It shouldn't be part of their diet or whatever. And that's not really how it is.
Right.
And that's a longer conversation we probably shouldn't go into.
No, absolutely. But, this already so far has been really wonderful and insightful to learn about, how your thought process is. And thank you for your time. I'd like to plug in, where people can find you, with your website, your Instagram, where people can purchase your content, things like that. So please feel free to tell us now, and I'll also include it if there's some sort of description as well.
Sure. I mean, I am primarily on Ljova.com, which is spelled Ljova. If you go to the Ljova.com/listen page, you will find my 10 or so albums that I've released independently. There's also a discography. There's some films excerpts of films that you can watch on Ljova.com. I'm also on YouTube and Bandcamp and SoundCloud and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And I'm here all week, so just come on over, commission something. That would be like the best present. Don't buy merch, just commission stuff. Seriously, I'm just kidding. You can buy merch. I have a closet full of merch. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, and this was really enjoyable for me. So I look forward to sharing it with listeners. Thank you.